Let's try this again, this time with the microphone on. This week we're taking a look at an incident that occurs in 2.5 Gospels. It's really in 3 Gospels, but the part we're looking at is only in 2 of the 3. So it's a story in Matthew chapter 16, Mark chapter 8, and Luke chapter 9. But Luke doesn't have the part that we're looking at today. This happens right after the disciples acknowledge that Jesus is the Christ. Then Jesus outlines the big picture of what would happen next. And that's where we are beginning today, Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. Mark says essentially the same exact thing. So we won't look at Mark's account, but then in what comes next, Matthew and Mark differ in a very significant way. So let's take a look at Matthew 16:22 and Mark 8:32b. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." Then Mark's account says, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. So I hope you noticed that the introductions were identical, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But notice that in Mark, there are no quotes of what Peter said to Jesus. Matthew tells us that after taking Jesus aside, Peter said 2 different things to him, but Mark does not include the quotes. Why not? Mark is widely accepted as being a relative of Peter's. He's either a young cousin or a nephew. And much of what Mark tells us, he has as his source Peter. Mark puts himself in his gospel toward the end, talking about a young man who saw this and ran off in the night, etc. But he's accepted as being informed largely by Peter. Matthew is an eyewitness. John is an eyewitness. Luke is not an eyewitness, and some great theologian referred to Paul as the illuminator of Luke, largely his source. But Paul is not an eyewitness to this event. So what we have here is an account by an eyewitness that includes quotes from Peter, despite the fact that Peter took Jesus aside to talk to him, and another account from the person who has Peter as his primary source, who tells us that he took him aside, but doesn't give us the quotes. Why might that be? Perhaps, and this is just a perhaps Mark is shielding Peter's reputation, or perhaps Peter doesn't want to share with Mark the things that he said to Jesus. We can't know, we can only speculate, but it's fascinating to see that Matthew includes the quotes, who's an eyewitness, and Mark, who is informed by Peter, does not include Peter's quotes. But let's take a look more closely at what Matthew says about this event. Kai pros labomenos auton, let's pause there for a moment. Kai and pros labomenos is a participle of pros lambano, took or received toward. So after taking him toward himself, after taking Jesus apart from the crowd, auton is him, then we get hopetros, Peter, erxato, he began, epitemon, to rebuke, auto him, saying, legon, saying. After taking him aside, Peter began to rebuke him, saying. Now look at that word epitemon. That's from epitemao, and it is I rebuke, I reprove, or I censure. Not censor, but censure. Censure is a verbal or written punishment, like to correct someone with harsh words. Now, this word is appropriate in two different contexts. The first is the context of lordship. So God rebuking his people is always appropriate. A lord or master rebuking a student or servant or even slave is appropriate, or a parent rebuking a child is appropriate. The other context in which this word is appropriate is in a brother-to-brother correction. And I don't mean a literal sibling, although that could apply. I mean people who are in the social interaction are peers or equals, because generally it's seen as a greater rebuking a lesser, and when it's not a greater rebuking a lesser, it's presumed to be equals rebuking the other. The best example of this is at the crucifixion. One thief is criticizing Jesus and the other thief says to him, "You and I are up here for our crimes. Why do you think it's right to criticize this man?" That's a very loose paraphrase, but no more equal people existed than the two thieves on the sides of Jesus. Both criminals, both crucified, both in the process of dying on a cross, one speaking a rebuke to the other. They are perfect equals in that moment. So, what about Peter? Is Peter the Lord of Jesus? No, quite the contrary. Are they siblings? No, not in any literal sense. Are they peers? No, they are not. Jesus is the master. Peter is the disciple. They are not peers. So for Jesus to be rebuked by Peter is inappropriate on both counts. Now, let's get to the quotes. Let's look at what Peter said to Jesus. Hileos soi Kyrie is the first one. Hileos is merciful or mercifully, and it's a stand-in for God have mercy. In English, you might say to someone upon hearing that they're going through something difficult, have mercy. And that's a shorthand for may God have mercy on you. So Peter says to Jesus in the rebuke, mercy to you, Kyrie, Lord. Isn't it ironic that even in the instant he calls him Lord, and that can just mean sir, but it's a sign of respect, it's an honorific. Peter acknowledges that Jesus is master here. Mercy to or for you, Lord. May God have mercy on you so that this thing that you've just described not happen to you. Then he says the second thing, ume estai soi tuto. Let's start with the last word, tuto, this. What does he mean, this? This thing that you've just described, that you would go up to Jerusalem and be persecuted and prosecuted and put to death. This thing, ume, double negation, as strong as it can be, estai, shall be. This thing shall not be soi, for you or to you. This thing shall never happen to you. So those are our two rebukes. May God have mercy on you or for you or to you. May this thing not happen to you, Lord. This thing shall never be for you. Not because he's disagreeing with what Jesus has said. He is disagreeing, obviously, but he's rejecting this horrific vision from Jesus. Peter cannot accept this future. Maybe that's why Mark doesn't include the quotes. Maybe Peter doesn't tell Mark the quotes, or maybe Mark hears the quotes from Peter and says, you know what? This thing that Peter did, it's untoward, it's inappropriate, it's out of bounds. There's no need to record what he said to him. It's enough to say that he rebuked him, and it's enough to record what Jesus said back to him. But we can't know for sure. One thing we know for sure, it's fascinating that Matthew includes the quotes from Peter, and Mark, who is using Peter as a primary source, does not include the quotes from Peter. Now, let's talk about what we can learn from what Peter did. This is a magnificent picture, an example of the humanity of Peter in this instance. It's a disciple rebuking his own master because the disciple has a competing, preferable vision. Peter has a vision in his mind of how things will be with Jesus, and what Jesus just said doesn't comport with that. I don't want to see Jesus persecuted and suffer and die. Obviously, Peter doesn't want that, but he doesn't understand that the mission of Christ is just that, right? So his competing preferable vision causes him to speak out against the vision that Jesus has just laid out. That's a temptation for all humans. I think I know better, and I'm going to push my vision in place of your vision because I think I know better. Even if I call you Lord, I might want to push my competing vision in place of yours. Now, we're going to get another great contrast of Matthew and Mark's accounts in what happens with Jesus' response to Peter. Let's take a look. This is Matthew 16:23 and Mark 8:33. But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Now we go to Mark. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." So, if you notice in both, Jesus rebuked Peter. And that's an appropriate use of epitomao. This is a Lord, a master, rebuking a disciple. So that is the appropriate or correct function of epitomao. So here we have the corrective linguistically as well. This is the right way for rebuking to happen. But notice in Matthew's account, after "Get behind me, Satan," Jesus says, "You are a hindrance to me." And hindrance here is scandalon. Most of you have probably heard that word, scandalon. We get English scandal from it. A scandalon is a thing that gets thrown into a person's path in order to trip him up. A stumbling stone, a stumbling block. So Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," in both of them. But in Matthew, he says, "You are a scandalon. You are something thrown in my path to cause me to trip and fall, to make me stumble." Notice, again, Mark does not call Peter, or does not have Jesus call Peter a scandalon, a stumbling stone, which is pretty wild considering he's perfectly comfortable with Jesus saying, "Get behind me, Satan." So both writers say, "Get behind me, Satan." This is generally accepted as a reference to the temptation in the wilderness where Satan tries to get Jesus to divert from his course, from his path, in two ways, the assurance that he deserves better and the promise of an easier path, right? That's what the devil offers Jesus in the wilderness, and by taking him aside and rebuking the way that he does, Peter offers the same two things. You deserve better than this, and there's an easier path. May God have mercy that you should not have to go through this. Not you, Lord. You're too good to suffer this way, and surely it shall not be for you to be put to death. There's an easier path for you. There's a better path, one of which you are more deserving. Get behind me, Satan. This is taking me off the road that I came to tread. You are a hindrance and a stumbling block. So what can we learn from this story? What comes away? Number one, if you're in a relationship with someone where you are the junior and they are the senior, where you are the disciple and they are the master, where they are the Lord and you are not, if you catch yourself rebuking them, you're probably wrong. Okay? The second is, you're probably misunderstanding the major dynamic of the relationship, and you may perhaps be missing the whole point of what's going on if you decide that you have a better vision for that person. If you're not the Lord and you're not the brother or the peer of that person, then the rebuking would be inappropriate. The next thing to consider is, for sort of homework, contemplate the differences in the writers of these events. Think about some of the reasons that they might record it differently. Some of you will always resort to the simplistic, well, because God told him to write it different. Go ahead and stipulate that. Go ahead and assume that. The Spirit moved one writer differently than the other. Go ahead and assume that. The question is, why? What is the meaning that can be ascertained from the differences in the way that these writers recorded it or were inspired to record it? Hopefully, in our lives, as a parting thought, each of us will have a redactor who is as kind to us as Mark was to Peter, and maybe not necessarily bringing up every misguided or foolish thing that we may have said. I hope that was good for you. If it was, please let me know in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And if there's a passage that you would like to have tackled in an episode of Koine Corner, let me know in the comments, and we'll see if we can make that happen for you. And until next time, Charis Kai Irene Humin, grace and peace to you.